Hello, and thanks so much for joining us. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America, and my guest today is historian and award-winning professor of history at Johns Hopkins University, author of Vanguard and Birthright, Citizens, and so many others. And she joins me today to discuss her latest book, The Trouble of Color, an American Family Memoir, where she explores her journey through race and color through her ancestors. And Martha S. Jones, welcome back to Black America.
Thank you, Carol.
It is such a pleasure. I always describe you as my rock star historian, you know? I mean, people who don't know the field that much say rock star, historian. Do those words go together? And for you, they do.
Well, that's very nice of you to say. I'm not sure I'd need a whole other ensemble to be a rock star historian. But it has been important to me to write history and to speak about history in ways that reach broad audiences. And so I'll accept that part of the moniker.
Right, and also a part of the CUNY family. We want to point that out. CUNY Law, Hunter College, and you were inducted, what is this, as outstanding?
Hunter College Hall of Fame. And
wow.
Talk about rock star status. For me, who began a very long time ago, a somewhat lost, confused, beginning person at Hunter. It's an incredible honor to be recognized by, as you know, an alumni association that includes so many luminaries.
Great, great. Well, now that we've established all of your credentials, I want to say that this book was probably the best mystery that I have read in a long, long time. You searching through, my goodness, deeds, and you get to the courthouse and the library and all of that, looking for your ancestors. And all of this goes back to the question that one of your classmates posed to you in a very challenging way. Exactly who do you think you are? And so you went looking for who you are.
Yeah, as you say, I think that was a really challenging confrontation. I was a first year in college. I was, as we say, green as they come, but Black Studies was coming into being in the 1970s, and I wanted to be there to understand our history, but also to understand myself. So when somebody challenges you in the classroom and really puts on the table the question, do you belong here at all? That stays with you, and it has stayed with me for a long time. It was a hurtful moment, but it was also a defining moment, and it definitely is the impetus behind, finally, this book that lets me tell the whole story.
Well, the challenge to you was that your classmate didn't think that you were Black or Black enough to even read, the piece of literature that you were reading. Was it Frantz Fanon?
It was Frantz Fanon's A Dying Colonialism. And, my classmate was right on the one hand. I knew nothing about Frantz Fanon, about the history that he recounted of colonialism. I was a student. I was learning. But where he was wrong, I think, was in the notion that he could judge this book by its cover and then arbitrate who's in and who's out, not only in Black studies, but in our sort of roiling Black world.
So then you tell us about looking for Nancy, because that is at the heart of the story and the mystery. And you found her. Extraordinary, I must say. So this is your...
There she is. My great-great-great-grandmother who opens this book, Nancy Bell Graves, born enslaved in Danville, Kentucky in 1808. This photograph I discover among a cache of family photos, and I realize she's likely the oldest ancestor I'm going to encounter. But it's not so easy to recreate the life of a woman born in her time and in her circumstances. So part of my quest is to dig into, as historians often do, into the written record. But I also have to return to Danville and, if you will, walk the streets, visit the cemetery, to begin to get some sense of the fabric of her everyday life.
But you were able to like look in the window of the house that she lived in, which was just extraordinary that you were able to locate that.
But, you know, isn't that part of the irony of our work when we look to recover our family histories? Again and again, I had to rely upon the records and the legacies of slaveholders. The house you refer to is the house in which she was held as an enslaved person for much of her early life. And I have to rely on that legacy in order to recover our legacy. And for me, that was always a tension, how to use those kinds of artifacts, but not defer to them, and to always be listening for her.
Well, you know, an intriguing situation encounter when you ask the librarian or whatever, when you go to Danville and you're asking for this family, and you know, you're told, be very careful.
Yeah, well, that's right. And along the way, I do encounter people for whom the story I'm trying to discover and I'm trying to tell, they sense how it will disrupt, right, the narratives that many of us carry around about our families, about our communities, about the world. And so when I begin to press and say, I'm trying to understand Nancy's connections to what is still remembered to be a founding family in Danville, the Bell family, that's a hard moment for the librarian. Now, it's important to say, I think the librarian is trying to look out for me. In other words, she's concerned in part that I might encounter people outside the library whose reactions would be even stronger than hers. I think she's trying to be helpful, but of course at the same time she's admitting, right, the ways in which our family stories are still oftentimes disruptive to old and venerated and celebrated stories about people. Stories that oftentimes allied, for example, their slaveholding past.
Exactly. So, you know, here's the other family, in many instances living side by side with the white family, the extraordinary. Now, your grandfather, you uncovered, somebody was writing about, he was the president of Bennett College, the esteemed black women's school, and someone in literature, in a written piece, referred to him as a white man, and you knew better.
And there's a defining moment for me. On the one hand, I begin to have a new kind of relationship with my grandfather, who I never knew, but I grew up adoring nonetheless. We all know that feeling about our ancestors. But I realized that the dilemmas that I experienced, like in that classroom, were dilemmas that he too experienced in his lifetime. So here is a thoughtful scholar who I can only surmise saw his photograph and drew a set of assumptions about him. And this really let me know that I was somehow destined to rewrite the story, set the record straight, but also to invite us to think about how it is as a black American to walk into rooms, as he had to raise money, right, negotiate politically in Greensboro, North Carolina in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s to build Bennett College. And every time he walks in a room, there's somebody who says,
right,
whose eyes are befuddled.
Right, but it would make sense that it would be a white businessman, right? You
Yeah.
know, that,
Well, and at HBCUs in that period, that's
right.
certainly the case.
Right.
And yet he was born and raised in Greensboro. He was a native son. He had been raised in a black enclave, Warnersville, that had been created for former slaves like his mother after the Civil War. He couldn't have had a more rooted and authentic relationship to Black Greensboro. So it feels important, or has felt important to me, to lift that up.
Right, right. And Bennett still exists. Your dad grew up on the campus there.
He did.
Right, and Spelman is the only other college that remains. So these were schools created to train black women how to live beyond slavery.
And this is certainly his mission. for 30 years on the Bennett campus, along with my grandmother, who was really his partner in all things. And by the time I'm born in the 1950s, he has passed, but my grandmother spends the rest of her life living on the campus in the original president's home. And every summer, that is my destination as a young person. So I think of myself very much still as a part of the Bennett family.
Right, right. So this complication, here you are. By the time you get to this book, you have already produced 3 or 4 major explorations of Black women and Black life in America. Essentially what you did was to restore Black women to the origin of protest and organization in this, in this country. So then to have to live through that and say, wait a minute, now what about my family? And I was really so impressed by your research technique to be able to translate a line in a census report that had no detail whatsoever, and to be able to actually create a human being, a full-fledged person out of that one line.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what so many family historians and historians, in the scholarly sphere, this is what we aspire to. And partly for me, it was about going back to a lot of the kinds of documents that anyone who's done family history is likely to have encountered, like a census return. It's very ministerial, it's got columns, it's got codes, it's got boxes. But I began to think about those kinds of documents not as authoritative, right? Not as the official record, but as storytelling too. And realizing that there were men, and they were mostly men in my story, who went door to door and interviewed people like my great-great-grandmother Mary, and ask her, who's in your household, how old are they? He sizes you up and decides what color you are, and it fills in a box, M for mulatto, free person of color, and he's telling a story about what he thinks he sees. That, in my family story, it turns out, does not comport with who people were. And so folks are sometimes unwittingly and sometimes intentionally tricking the eye. In Mary's case, it's because, in fact, she is a white woman, and she has married a man of color. This is illegal in North Carolina, where they live. And in order to make and protect her family, she has to pass, as we say, and she has to trick the eye of that census taker who might expose her family for the illicit gathering of human beings that it is.
Right, right, right. And we should say the M for mulatto, which was a term that was used for biracial.
Yes.
Before we got to politically correct biracial, whatever. But so the white woman who married the man of color, and she's now delivering the information to the census taker. Didn't she also not divulge the existence of a younger child?
Well, there's a mystery, and I think that's part of what folks who do family research know, is that we get to moments where we just cannot. So it's true, Mary never reports or reveals to the census taker that she has a youngest son. That youngest son happens to be my great-grandfather, Dallas Jones. And so again and again in the book, I invite readers to sit with me and reflect on what we can't know, on the absences, and to remember that that too is part of our history. Now, I want to say the book is really about what we can know, and that we can know a great deal more than we might think, maybe even than we've been told. But there are certainly moments in which I can't go much further, and Mary's story about her family is one of those mysteries to me still.
Right, right. I want to bring up 2 other historians. Nell Painter, who's been here. I adore her. I told you I just saw her at a book party for her latest book. She's just magnificent. But her advice to you about what to look for, because getting from that one little entry in the census to the full-blooded depiction that you've given us is, part of what she's asked you to imagine.
Nell Irvin Painter, of course, is a great model, someone I studied when I was first coming up as a historian, and is still writing and provoking our thinking until today. I couldn't admire her more, but there is one refrain that I carry with me, and it is, "Remember the blood on the page." What is Nell Painter saying there? She's reminding us that something like a census return or a death certificate or a will, these look, and they are constructed to be clean, to be ministerial, to be bureaucratic, to be neutral. And it's up to us to remember that what created these censuses, what creates a death certificate, what creates a slaveholder's ledger, that is blood, that is violence, that is the exploitation of Black Americans. And the paper might try and mislead us about that and tell us it was all rather ordinary.
Right.
And we are charged, we are obliged to remember the violence that runs clear through those kinds of documents.
Right, right. And I noticed that congratulations on the great write-up in the New York Times. In that article, she also mentions the past president of the American Historical Association, the first Black woman who had been president. She's new to me, but I did, by some weird circumstance, probably from some reference that you may have made, listen to her address. And as I said to you earlier, I probably understood about 20% of it. But the title of it is Tracings. And again, she is talking about the same thing that Nell Painter is talking about, to understand what lies beneath those single entry names.
Yeah.
And the tracings that she was, and I had not also realized that the tracings came from when Black people could not try on clothes or shoes, and therefore a tracing would be made of someone's foot in order to purchase shoes. And then she's saying that's what's in the archives.
So Thavolia Glimpf, as you mentioned, at Duke University, in just January of this year, gave her presidential address for the American Historical Association. And Dr. Glimpf is really, I think, underscoring what I think moves me in this book, which is that insistence that we are there in the historical record, that we left marks on it that are unconventional, that are subtle, that are fragmentary, but we are there. And her charge, of course, is to historians, but I think it's an admonition that works as well for folks who are doing family storytelling and more, that our charge is to be, in my word, not hers, but is to be dogged, right? And is to not allow, a reluctant librarian or an absent-minded archivist, or even folks who are hostile to our stories to get in the way of this work. Now, Carrie Greenidge, a great historian who penned the New York Times review, whom I'm very grateful to because she was so careful and so generous. Dr. Greenidge's point in part is that in a moment where Black history is right at the center of some of our most pointed political controversies in 2025, now more than ever, we need to understand not only the content of Black history, but how we go about discovering it and preserving it in the face of not only a local reluctant librarian, but perhaps even a political administration that is hostile to our work.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts about that? How do we go forward? Because certainly the request is that we all become invisible,
Yeah.
Not that we were that visible, but for all of the work that's been done to place us right in the mainstream of American history. Now we're being told, no, that was an illusion.
I've been thinking a lot about the great Carter G. Woodson. Carter Woodson is a one of the very first black PhDs from Harvard, a historian who is boxed out of the academy, is boxed out of officialdom, though he is a brilliant scholar. Carter Woodson creates what is today the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. In his day, the Association for the Study of Negro History. He creates the Journal of Negro History, today the Journal of African American History, and so forth. And I think remembering where we come from, remember the people we come from, remember that this is not the first time that we have faced opposition and the denial of not only our writing and our books and our discoveries, but of our very existence. This is not the first time. And so for me, going back to those foremothers and forefathers who wrote our early history, who invented our associations, I think is critical. And so we will continue to discover how we, what we say, way out of no way, right? And how we make a world, as we always have. I'm not someone who's a prognosticator. I can't tell us exactly where we're headed, but I can say with certitude that we are entering a time when history is going to be a battleground, how we tell our history. I've been making it a point of visiting some of our national historic sites. I just in the last 2 weeks have been to Fort Sumter in South Carolina, for example, wanting to be there and remember. I visited the Tuskegee site outside of Montgomery, Alabama, and the story of the Red Tails and the Tuskegee Airmen. Really wanting to take in this moment in which we can still see the way in which it was possible for this nation to make good on the claim that Black history is American history. Some of that may indeed disappear for a time. So I'm also stocking my own archive, my personal archive, with all that we've accomplished to this point.
Wow, wow. With just the thought of wanting to make sure that you could take it in before it completely disappeared is really, and then creating a space for others to go to it. I just encountered several Black families who have begun to pull their children out of mainstream public school and are homeschooling now because their history can't be taught. And so are we moving back to needing a Bennett College, a Spelman College, our own universities, our own, all of that, if this continues in this way?
Yeah, I mean, I think the return, if you will, to HBCUs was already underway well before this moment. But there's no question that as historically Black colleges and universities always have been, they have been places that have preserved and honored and taught and researched our world, and they will continue to do that. And so yes, I think we're all going to be looking to those institutions. I visited in Montgomery Brian Stevenson's great legacy museum, his lynching memorial, his new sculpture park on the Alabama River. Well, now Brian is somebody who is with his own initiative and his own extraordinary capacity to bring philanthropic support to Black history. Those are the kinds of things that even a hostile federal government cannot take from us. And
yeah.
yes.
And then you found your own family names there,
oh my
right?
gosh, Carol.
Right.
So this is a moment in the new sculpture park in Montgomery, as I said, on the river. The Equal Justice Initiative has installed a wall of family names, names of those families who survive and live through emancipation. I had never seen a monument defined in that way. And indeed, you can see Holly, which is the name of my great-grandmother, Isabella, and her daughter, Jenny, whom I write about. Jones over here on the left, of course, the name I carry. And then Bell. We started talking about Nancy Bell Graves. And names are complicated in our history because the names Holly and Bell, certainly I know, were also the names of slaveholders, and partly what I try and do in the book is meditate on what it means to keep or to give up those names over time. Jones is a name I don't know the origin of still, so
Right.
even as it's the name I carry, but I know it's the one that my ancestors have carried for now 6 generations.
6 generations. You know, when I went to the museum, I went with cousins, but we found our cousin on the list of people who had been lynched. So, you know, I'm glad that they've added this piece to it, that these are the surviving names and families that still can be found in existence with descendants, you know, in the country. Yeah, I'll be going there soon myself for another. I haven't seen the sculpture park yet. I definitely want to.
It's very moving, and it begins with a brief ride on the Alabama River, a great reminder of how much movement and waterways are key parts to our story. So it's beautifully done.
That is terrific. I want to ask you, again, bringing you back up to current political terms, you've written the book on birthright citizenship and what that meant, and now there is a declaration to take that away. Talk to us about what that means to us and just generally.
Sure. So it's true, in 2018 I published a book called Birthright Citizens, which dropped back then, already into a scene in which the first Trump administration was beginning to speak of somehow abrogating birthright citizenship. I had told the story in that book of the role, the essential role that Black Americans had played in the decades before the Civil War, picking up this principle, claiming birthright citizenship for themselves, and ultimately advocating so intensely, so persistently that we see the birthright principle ultimately incorporated into our Constitution, into the 14th Amendment today. Well, for Black Americans, this is one transformation that is essential for understanding how it is that we have a indelible belonging, but it was never written only for Black Americans. It was a principle that has applied to all Americans, including, importantly today, immigrant Americans. And so when we see an administration looking to undo that, there are many, many policy questions that are implicated, of course, and the lives of many, many, particularly immigrant Americans that are implicated, but it is also an attempt to undo an important story in our Black history as well.
Well, thank you so much. I wish we had more time. You'll have to come back again.
Anytime, of course.
I love talking with you. I love the book, The Trouble of Color, an American Family Memoir. It's a fascinating read. Our thanks today to historian, rock star historian, and author Martha S. Jones. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you the next time. I'm Carol Jenkins. The program is Black America. And now you can download the CUNY TV app in your Apple Store or in Google Play and find us there.